Before I get started talking about Last Regiment, there's some industry stuff that I want to talk about. Kickstarter has launched its own competitor to Patreon, which is very interesting. The big difference, obviously, between Kickstarter and Patreon is Kickstarter has this sort of hard look. You're going to have X number of days, and during X number of days, you're going to get people to fund your project. And if they don't fund it within X number of days, fuck you, you don't get any money. And that's how that is. Now, we've done a couple Kickstarters. We tried to kickstart Callasia twice, failed 2 Kickstarters. It was painful and it was sad, and a little part of me died. But then we did the game anyway, and then once we had the game up, we said, hey, we actually have users and stuff, so let's do another Kickstarter. We did another Kickstarter to kickstart one of the DLCs, the Dwarven DLC, and that actually went through. But to be honest, it went through because our bar for success on that was really low. So, whether or not you want to call that a success, I don't know. I guess it was it was successful. We got money, and thanks for everyone who supported it. But in terms of us being able to fund a full project with Kickstarter, we haven't been able to do that yet. And this isn't just my opinion. I've heard this from other people, but it's my opinion that basically you've got 3 ways to make a Kickstarter work. One, you're already really famous. You're a Richard Garriott or somebody who's done a famous game. You're Miyamoto or something like that, and everybody says, "Oh my God, I want to fund him," and they throw money at you. I'm not famous. 2, you have a famous IP. You come up and you say, "Hey, we're going to make the new Dukes of Hazzard," and everyone, "Oh, Dukes of Hazzard! I love Dukes of Hazzard," and you get something off the IP. Or 3, you're something that's so marketable or memorable that it can actually break through the game press and go into the mainstream media. Okay, we've got a game that cures cancer or something like that. Number 1 and 2, they're not really options for us. I don't have the money to go out and get a license. And to be honest, I don't really want to work on licensed products. And I'm not famous. So for us, Kickstarter has been problematic. But it's interesting because Patreon has been a different thing, which is, hey, we've got this service or we're doing this thing and we want you to continue supporting us. And it's been really good for people who do, like, I've got a comic strip and people love my comic strip and I want people to support my comic strip. The Patreon is great for stuff like that, where there's some web content where asking you to pay for that web content is going to be really invasive, but guys got to eat, and you're trying to figure out some way to get your users to get money to you. Patreon's been good for that. So what Kickstarter's done is they've actually put what they're describing as and I'm reading a little bit off of their press release, what they're describing as a subscription tool that allows creators and artists to receive recurring financial support from its audience, as opposed to the one-time project funding offered by Kickstarter, which is, of course, obviously very similar to Patreon and what Patreon does. According to them, their unique selling point is that it will tap into the established Kickstarter community, with the company promising seamless access to the 14 million users who are already pledging towards projects at the leading crowdfunding site. Actually, I think this is going to be a big thing and I'm not sure how it works with games, because the thing is, we already have subscription service options for games. If I want to make a game with a subscription option, there's already kind of ways to do that don't involve going outside to another thing. So I don't know that, I'm going to try to hook up Last Regiment to Drip and say, hey, everybody, pay me $5 a month to, I don't, we already have vehicles for that. So I don't know exactly how that fits into the game world, but how it fits into the creative world is interesting. There is also the question about discovery. The one thing that Kickstarter certainly does have, as they say, is 14 million people that have been willing to throw money at things, and largely throw money at games. When I look at Legends of Callasia, our last strategy game, and why did it not become the huge financial success that we wanted it to be, there were certainly problems with the game. There were certainly problems with the design, and I'll be the first to talk about that. But the other side of it was, we really had a discoverability issue. People just didn't know that the game existed. And I think that there's lots of people out there that would have loved to have played Callasia that never heard about Callasia, never even heard that it existed. And that problem is something that someone like Kickstarter might be able to do something with. But of course, right now the problem is, if you go through Kickstarter, you have to go through the normal Kickstarter system. And that's got a very narrow focus. I need this money right now. So I actually think this Drip thing, I'm curious to see how, I literally found out about this like 5 minutes ago, and I was like, wow, that's really, really interesting. Obviously, there are other services like this. The problem has always been how big is your network? You know, that's what Kickstarter makes its money for. For those of you who don't know, if you fund a project through Kickstarter, you don't get all of that money. A certain part of that money gets, you know, pulled away by credit card companies and PayPal and whatnot. But then a reasonable hunk of that money, I think it's like 10%, gets pulled away for, you know, Kickstarter. That's how Kickstarter is a business. That's how they make money. And I don't begrudge them that. But the point of the matter is, the reason they get that 10% is not because they processed credit cards for you. It's because they brought you that audience. That's what they're really earning their 10% for. It's the same with Steam. You know, we could put together a payment processing system. It would be a pain in the ass, but we could do one. So Steam doesn't make its money because it processes credit cards. Steam makes its money because they have a huge group of gamers, and they have the ability for you to, you know, talk to those gamers through their system. That's the value of these platforms. And so when you talk about, hey, I you know, have you thought about going to this other service or that other service? The question is always, how big is that user base? Now, there's another side to it, of course, which is how big is that user base, and then how many products are they being offered, right? So in the case of Kickstarter, that's the big problem with Kickstarter is, sure, they've got 14 million people who pay for shit. They've also got like 200 products a week just in games being put out. So you have to actually somehow rise above 200 games a week during your 30 days on Kickstarter for those 14 million people to know that you exist. Of course, those 14 million people don't all exist in games, but that's the problem. So there's kind of an argument. There's a left-hand, right-hand thing where you're like, well, okay, Kickstarter's got a lot more people, but you know what? This other service has, you know, a lot fewer games. And so those people that are there have a much higher chance of actually seeing your game bubble up to the top, etc. It's a trade-off. So that's one of the things. So over in chat, somebody mentions for this, why don't you go to some cons or Twitch meetups and stuff? Actually, interestingly enough, we are doing exactly that. And this gets me away from my Patreon, Kickstarter, drip, whatever talk, and into some more content about what I chose to talk about today, which is some of the next big goals for Last Regiment. We're submitting this game to the Indie Mega Booth, and we are trying to be part of the Indie Mega Booth at PAX East. I have done PAX South with Legends of Callasia. I've done PAX East with Legends of Callasia. I thought they were both great shows. I found that the value of going to multiple PAXs with the same game kind of degenerates over time. You know, your first show is a really big one because, wow, nobody's seen or heard of this before, and it's really big, and the press that goes to all the PAXs comes and sees your stuff, and that's usually a big thing. When you go to the second show, it's a little less so. People are like, oh, I saw this at the last convention. I was at PAX South, I saw this. And so you kind of get looked over a little bit. And so the big question for us is, are we going to go to PAX East? Basically, what I have decided is, if the Indie Mega Booth people will let us be in their fancy Indie Mega Booth, then we will go to PAX East. But I will not buy our own booth for PAX East. I've not seen that the return on the investment is worth it on that. Now, I may change my mind after PAX South, but the problem is I'm kind of running out of time to change my mind because those booths and stuff sell out. And for those of you who are wondering why I want to be in the Indie Mega Booth so bad, it's a thing that I've noticed when we go to PAX that, you know, as a you know, we're not a really fancy game. We don't have, you know, I can't put up a screen and show you the big huge fights, you know. I can't, we're not that, we're a strategy game. Strategy game is a slower, quieter game, and that's just what they are. And when we are showing off our game in a booth by ourselves, it's a little bit difficult because, well, we got to get people to come to the booth. You know, it's a problem. Is you have to market your marketing. You know, okay, how are you gonna market your game? We'll go to a convention. Okay, how are you going to market your game at the convention? How do you get people to come to the booth? You know, and it's a recurring problem. If you think about it from the press's point of view, they're going to be coming to PAX and they've got a list of what they need to do. Nobody comes to PAX and says, okay, we got to check out what Boomzap's up to. And so getting them to come to our booth is actually kind of a struggle. We have to reach out to them. We have to make an argument for them to come. We have to somehow drag them over to where we are. If you're in the Indie Mega Booth, everyone in the press has got on their list of shit to do, go check out the games in the Indie Mega Booth. And they're going to come by and at least take a look at what you're doing. Now, you still have to draw them into your booth and get them interested in what you're doing. But they're at least going to come and, you know, you get some eyeballs out of it. And again, we get back to the same argument of, what matters in games. It's about the platform. What does Indie Mega Booth offer? Indie Mega Booth offers the fact that they're the Indie Mega Booth and that people come to that. Your other option is, okay, I'm going to go sign with one of these sort of boutique publishers, and the boutique publisher is going to put together a booth, and they've got a PR agency, and they're going to go out and make your thing happen for you. And that's great if you want to have a publisher, but we're an indie studio. I don't want to have a publisher. And so for me, I'm trying to find that place where we get on somebody's list of things to do without having to sign up with a publisher, because we want to be an independent game. That's what we're trying to do here.